Nick and Adam, welcome to the Way of Champions podcast. Jerry and I are honored to have you both on and super excited today to talk about your work in the anti-fragility space.
Thanks for having us. We're both glad to be here.
Yeah, excited
Yeah,
to be here.
Yeah,
good, good,
awesome.
good.
Well, I want to we did a little bit of each of your bio, before we got together here, but if you could just Adam, maybe just starting with you, just give us the little 30,000 foot view of who you are and what you do, and then Nick will have you after that.
Sure. So first, I identify as a mental performance consultant or coach, but I'm also a licensed psychotherapist. Was a professor for about 10 years. My PhD's in sports psychology, but I've also trained clinically. So what I'm interested more than anything else is integrating, like creating a bridge, what I think is clinical counseling, performance psychology, but then I have a very strong background in exercise science. I started my life as a strength and conditioning coach, exercise physiologist.
Hmm.
So from my perspective, it's always integrated, the mental, right, the emotional, and the physical demands of high performance, and try to come in a way I think that's not just looking to deal with the performance itself, but also meaning making and understanding identity and probably getting a little more deep. I've trained psychoanalytically and not just cognitive behaviorally. So I think my perspective tends to be probably a little different than other people that work in this performance psychology space.
Hmm.
Currently, right now, I serve as director of mental performance for the Washington Nationals, and I'm a performance consultant with Gotham FC. And Nick and I have a business together called the Antifragile Academy, which we'll be happy to discuss further.
Awesome. Perfect. Thank you. Nick, go ahead.
So my PhD is in educational psychology, and somewhat like Adam, I do performance consulting and coaching. I do a lot of well-being or flourishing kind of consulting and coaching. But in terms of our relationship, a lot of kind of my tasks are devoted to trying to turn Adam's brain and deep experience into programming that can really help people, right? Adam's such a wonderful coach in a lot of different ways. I'm coming more from a teaching curriculum design. How do we kind of scale some of these things so that we can reach more people, right? And without necessarily sacrificing a ton of efficacy. That's where the trick is, of course, and that's a very difficult thing to do.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So yeah, we kind of have this Venn diagram where I'm bringing different sort of scientific backgrounds to the lens of human potential than Adam is, and then bringing slightly different skill sets as well, so that we can come together and really try to democratize this and get it out to as many people as possible and help as many people as possible.
It's awesome. What made you two come together and start this Anti-Fragile Academy?
I mean, I would say values, which maybe is a bit of an odd answer, or at least one you might not have expected. But so, and then maybe another way to say it
Okay.
is the wrong sort of values brought us together initially because we were both working for an organization and let's say created some common enemy intimacy and commiseration with one another. And we quickly learned, well, we don't just do similar things, we have similar feelings and values about how we should do them and who
Hmm.
we should be doing them for. And so one thing led to another, and eventually Adam moved on. I moved on a year later, and once we were both sort of freed up, we came back together and said, "Hey, we see kind of these growing challenges, these growing problems. He's getting calls from youth athletes and parents. I'm getting calls from people. Why don't we come together, kind of combine our heads and combine our backgrounds and see if we can do something that'll be, helpful."
And
Yeah.
if I recall too, it was a time when within a month, five NCAA athletes committed suicide.
Wow.
So we had
It
been
was close
talking, it
to
was
that.
like March, maybe 3 years ago, and we were talking
Yeah.
about it and said, okay, it's time that we actually formalize this and put something together because the issue is always, as you know, being in this field, the reactive process is not always the best process. And we were trying to approach this more proactively from a
Yeah.
psychoeducational. So you don't get to the point where you sit in my clinical office, right? Let's get them before that
Hmm.
because there's
I,
just not enough of us out there. There's not enough resources to go around, and the stigma and everything else that goes along with these issues.
Yeah.
I remember a couple of years ago, probably, before that, I read this book called What Made Maddie Run. Do you know that one?
I don't.
It's a phenomenal book, and I forget the author's name. And I think the girl Maddie was from Northern Jersey or something like that. But affluent family, great kid, smart, great athlete, beautiful, everything, went to, I think, UPenn
And I remember that she jumped.
and
I remember
Mm,
this. Yes.
jumped off a parking garage and no
Yep.
one saw it coming and it just explored this. And I remember reading that book as the, father of a daughter who, ticks, a lot of those boxes and just being like, man, how do you know? Like,
mhm.
you're always like asking the questions and are you okay and are you good? But certainly in this world now where kids can be influenced by people that we don't know are influencing them and be taught that this is a solution to this struggle you're going through is really scary from a
Yeah.
parenting perspective. And I mean, Jerry's got kids and I have kids and it's just like, whoa. So I just remember reading that book
Hmm.
and changing my whole perspective on just because everything looks right doesn't mean it's right. And it probably was that goalkeeper from Stanford at that time was
Hmm.
Yes.
probably the
Yes. Yeah.
trigger as well. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I have a pretty deep history in soccer and specifically and women's soccer. So it was that one actually in particular that I think kind of nudged me over an edge a little bit. And
Yeah.
exactly what Adam said, how do we try to do more to get out in front of this, right?
Yeah.
From a preventative, proactive standpoint.
Yeah. Well, before Jerry jumps in, I mean, as you said, between clinical practices and day-to-day stuff. I mean, just last night, I had a friend who's currently a Division One soccer coach, 12 years, worked in MLS as an
Hmm.
assistant coach. Um, just said, "Hey, John, do you have any resources for parents to allow their kids to fail?"
Mm, mm.
And I'm like, yeah, I do actually. And
Hmm.
it's funny. And it's just like, so I get this question once a week, as I'm sure you do. And I know Jerry does in different forms of it. But yeah, how do you answer that?
We do get that frequently. We just a couple months ago, I was given a talk at Meta, and the reason that talk came about is because it's a longtime client who, kind of said, "Hey, I'm worried about my boys." Basically, like for lack of a better phrase, I'm worried about them getting a little soft, right, and not having some of that resilience or that robustness. And we can get into all the distinctive kind of nerdy terms here, but we would really kind of respond to it as number one, it's the right question to ask because we would argue that unpleasant experiences can be, emphasis on can, right? Not always, extremely helpful. Not only just for growth's sake, but for psychological richness, for real, true, rich well being, or if you want to call it kind of mental health. Now, I would distinguish between sort of unpleasant experiences that are chosen, unpleasant experiences that are not chosen, and unpleasant experiences that seem to have very little and maybe even no utility. And so that's where we get words like anti-fragility or resilience or trauma, and we can kind of distinguish between them. But initially, and I mentioned earlier, I have a history and my research is really in positive psychology, human flourishing, those sorts of things. There's too much emphasis on the pleasant all the time. And the
Hmm.
more we were working with people and kind of saying, yeah, you can build things that nourish you, that's great. But let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Let's make
Hmm.
sure that you also have strategies for navigating unpleasant stuff when it occurs, but also so that you can go into chosen unpleasant and difficult things with an
Yeah.
anti-fragile confidence, not a fragile confidence.
Yeah. So it's a matter of what I hear you saying, at least I'm interpreting it as it's an embracing of
Yes.
the situation. In China, I use a lot of Eastern thought in my work,
Great.
and the Chinese word for crisis means two things at the same time, which you might know, but
Mm.
our listeners might not know. And it means danger, like watch out, but it also means opportunity.
Hmm.
And
Ooh.
loosely
Yep.
translated, I love the translation. It's opportunity blowing on a dangerous wind.
Hmm.
And I just thought when I was reading your work and thinking about the kind of things that you're doing, just how much that resonates with
Yes.
me and how much that probably resonates with you because we're talking about not just dealing with the crisis, we're talking about finding ways to forge ahead and be a better version of ourselves and come out of this crisis like on a higher plane. So maybe
Hmm.
you want to speak to that a little bit.
Well, it's funny on our website, we use a quote from Nassim Nicholas Taleb, who, of course, wrote the book Antifragile back in 2012. And the quote is, "Be the flame, wish for the wind,"
Yeah.
just to speak to
Yeah.
your double meaning there. But I'd
Yeah.
talk enough.
Wonderful.
Adam, jump in here.
I would, well, before I address, I think there's this idea of pressure, failure, adversity, and so forth in these high performance environments. That's right. It's stress is of like avoidable. This is why we're doing it, right? Embracing this as a training ground sounds great, right? Injuries become opportunities. Slumps become labs. We have all these sayings, right? For pressure, is the grounds for building methods, but we're not giving people the tools in which to do this. And more than that, we often point to the individual and say this person lacks such and such, that this person's not resilient, as opposed to looking at the greater system that surrounds them, looking at the culture which nourishes them or depletes them. So I think building these skills and skill sets, to me, trust is a skill set, just like confidence that's built. Giving the tools in a way that are action oriented, that are evidence based, but also understanding how the culture influence all of this. And inevitably in sport, we're looking for a high performance culture. But what Nick and I are constantly trying to teach and underline is that it also has to have very high support culture. That doesn't mean coddling. That means accepting, creating psychological safety, and providing the right tools for people to excel.
Mm,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Well,
There's
I'm thinking myself, God, my brain is like, oof, this whole idea of psychological safety.
Mhm.
John and I just did a DVD. It's called "Coaching the Quiet Crisis."
Hmm.
And the thing I like about that DVD, I'm going to just segue into what I like about what you guys are doing. At least I can guess philosophically where you're at.
Mhm.
Is that and Adam, you even alluded to this, is we want to catch these people before,
Mhm.
in an ideal world, we all have the safe environment. We all have the safe environment where we feel we belong. When you think of that Stanford athlete,
Mhm.
I knew her. I knew about her and her team and worked with Stanford a lot. And, it's just,
Mhm.
it was sad, but boy, I'll tell you what, the environment wasn't safe. It wasn't the
Mhm.
safe environment that we needed. And, we want to feel like we not only belong, but that we're important and we're valued.
Mhm.
And so let me use that statement as a lead into what are your what are your methodologies or what are the strategies that we can just jump right into and get that work done today?
Go ahead,
Go
Adam.
ahead, Nick. I was going to say, Nick, you could jump in on this. So let's start with this, right? So our training is eclectic, right? Nick has this wonderful training in pos psych, mine, in traditional sports psych and acceptance commitment therapy, cognitive therapy, and psychoanalysis. But none of this matters if you're not teaching people to be more aware of themselves, right, in their interior life. So I think without awareness, without teaching this sense of interoception, people having a language and an ability to express their emotions, to feel them truly, to accept them, what is, to realizing that we're not owned by them, that we have choices and optionality, and we can be psychologically flexible in very difficult situations. Like all these other skills are going to slip, right? They're not going to stick. So to me, the cognitive glue is self-awareness. Right? Nick, you want to continue to
Well,
flow
if
with that?
if you, yeah, I mean, if you want to then like even zoom out from that point for a moment, you heard some of our background and you guys would appreciate this, but certainly we're continuing with a biopsychosocial model. Although I'd argue we're kind of trying to add a layer a little bit. And we use language like top down, cognitive, bottom up, physiological, outside in, environmental, and inside out is another one that we've been talking a lot about, the role of values and a sense of meaning and kind of operating system and how you orient yourself to the world. Right. So we're trying to, I think, really focus on making sure that this is um, oriented towards creating more fully integrated athletes, right? It's not necessarily just mental performance. Like, hey, just think your way
Right.
through really difficult things. Like there's a place for that. That's part of it. But we're trying to be more all encompassing than that. not just because Adam has a brilliant background in it, but because we think that the research suggests like that's the way you got to go about it. Right now, we're limited, of course. We're certainly starting to just learn things, polyvagal theory, and all the sort of somatic sort of stuff. But what we do know and what we can use and can apply, we're trying to integrate into this program right now. Because by and large, and I'd be curious to see if you guys have the same experience, most people, let alone athletes, have little to no training or understanding at all. I mean, we do a simple little activity with every group we work with where we just ask them to list every emotion they can think of in about 60 seconds, right? And the group average rarely hits double digits in
Yeah.
terms of the amount of emotions that they can name, right? Only a couple times has that happened. And then you show them something like the mood meter out of the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence, or just a simple visual that's like, hey, there's 100 of these things, right?
Mm-hmm.
You've got 10% vocab right now.
Mm-hmm.
What are we doing? What are we talking about, right? And so all the little things like that, the CBT, the ACT, the acceptance, the gratitude, like the research backed stuff, but still under a larger framing of each element of your life matters, top down, bottom up, inside in, or excuse me, inside out, outside in.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And in a very simple way, it's, who you're around is going to impact you. You're going to impact the people that you're around. So it's understanding your environment, understanding your values. Are your values aligned with your goals? Setting the biology, one psychophysiology, so that you can actually have the capacity to act on these things in a meaningful way. It's like for let me give you an example. It's like I have an athlete right now, probably has some attention deficit issues. We're doing some neurofeedback with him. But at the same time, he doesn't want to be on medication. So what do we do? So we might want to explore cold, some ice baths 2 hours before the game to increase his adrenaline. Like there are ways to go about doing this that are multifaceted. We're not blinded by any one theory or ideology. And what we're trying to do is rather than keep them in silos, is to integrate it within a philosophy and an approach that's accessible. And then take these sometimes hard to understand or these kind of deep, complex topics and make them accessible and to make them actionable.
Mm-hmm.
And
It's such an interesting thing. I mean, my mind is like Jerry's now going a million different directions. I think Adam, your background to me is fascinating. That you started in exercise science and then into the psychoanalysis and the psychology side of things, because I always say I work with college teams. And, I'll say to the kids, especially the men, the women get it a little bit more, but especially the men, I'll say, if the strength and conditioning coach said to you, hey, you want to do a little extra, I'll help you run a little faster, jump a little higher, how many of you would sign up, right? Everyone would raise their hand. Like, of course, I'm going to do that for my team. But then you say, you know, but you also have access to a sports psychologist here that's going to help you strip away some of the interference and run a little faster and jump a little higher and be a little more clearer. And at the end of the season, only three of you are going to go see him or
yeah,
her, and so we still have this stigma around that part of things that's maybe a little harder to measure. And it's gotten better, right? But it's still, if I'm seeing the strength and conditioning coach, I'm enhancing myself. If I'm seeing the psychologist, there must be something wrong with me.
we've gone a long way from where we were, but we're a
Hmm.
long way from where we need to be. Like my office in the stadium is right next to the strength and conditioning room.
Yeah.
And even though I'm part of the medical room, but I rarely stay in there. I spend most of my time on the field or in the gym. I don't want anyone to look at me like I'm there to fix problems. That's
Yeah.
not my only goal. I can if we do. My goal is to make your brain work better and also to create more joy around the process of learning, right? And that's a very different perspective rather than a break fix perspective, right?
Yeah.
As opposed to build and grow perspective. And part of that is how I present myself. I put on shorts and a t-shirt. I don't wear this to the to the office, so to speak. And I know like a lot of my clinical analysts, they are up in arms around that approach, right? There's a professional boundary, but understanding this work in sports psychology is integrated. If you see me doing sports psychology, I'm probably doing it wrong.
Yeah.
I should
Yeah.
be integrated with this. I should just be another coach out there. It should not be stigmatized at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
So can
love
I?
that.
I
Go ahead,
just want
Jerry.
to say this. my background, I've been at this for 45 years,
I
probably
was
more,
reading,
but
yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
want to do that. I want to say 45 because it's a solid 45. The others were whatever. And sports psychology brought me r really far in my profession. And I was married to sports psychology, and I wound
Hmm.
up, I told John this, I got a divorce many years ago. And I mean, don't get me wrong. We it was irreconcilable differences
Okay.
philosophically, and so we got the divorce. We're still friends. We still talk, and we still go back and forth. And I still learn from sports psychology. But the thing is, it never quite seemed to go far enough for me. See what you think about this.
Mm-hmm.
It did a good job. It was really a great science, getting to the mind and helping to impact outside uh, external things,
Hmm.
performance. Way of champions, we've won 130 plus national championships. I'm not,
Wow.
it's crazy. Yeah. But, but having said that, when we started winning those championships or being part of those championships, it was after the divorce because what happened was I found, and now I'm not the science guy as you are. Trust me, I'm in the trenches. Uh, I love you guys and I love the science you're doing because what it does, it validates so much of what I intuitively believe to be true. It's so refreshing to hear you guys say, yeah, well, we've looked at that, we've taken the data, we've studied this stuff, and it's all good. So now I can go out and have more confidence in what I'm saying. You know what I'm saying?
Hmm.
But anyway, so what I found was that there's something else other than the mind, and that is the soul.
Hmm.
And the soul isn't a part of the body, as we all know. It's a conglomeration of the heart, the
Hmm.
attitude, the feelings, the body itself, the brain itself. It's all of that. And so, so this idea of the soul is like sports psychology approached it, but it never quite got there. And by soul, I'm talking about things like grit and courage, and I'm talking about gratitude and all these other wonderful qualities. And you can call it what you want, but we need to reach that in these athletes. It's more than because I feel like if I'm feeling loved, and by love, it's not some kumbaya moment. It's I feel connected. I feel cared for. I feel important. I feel valued. I feel like I belong. If I
Hmm.
feel all these things, my performance is going to go higher. And what I notice in my work, in my practice, is that when I address those issues, and by the way, all those things can be taught. They can
Hmm.
be taught. You can
Hmm.
teach courage. I teach
Hmm.
courage. I teach
Hmm.
grit. If you
Hmm.
don't have it, hey, come to me. I'll show you how to have grit. And the thing is, the beauty of that to me is people make these breakthroughs that are not only good for sports performance on a Saturday afternoon, but for all of life. And they're
Right.
happier. What a concept. And you mentioned the word joy, and they feel that joy. And joy isn't a mental construct.
Hmm.
It's a habit that we develop over time based on what we're taught. And anyway, what am I saying here?
Here's what I hear you saying.
Yeah,
I hear you
thank you.
saying it's about meaning making. It's an athlete that plays with purpose. It's not just playing for the
Beautiful.
scoreboard.
That's
It's
it.
a team that can
Bingo.
sacrifice for the
Yeah,
greater, something more than themselves, right? Because
yeah,
they believe in a
yeah.
mission.
That's right. That's
You
right.
you can reclaim your identity as an athlete and as a
Yeah,
human being, even if you're injured or you have a loss. And
right.
there's so much more than just doing, right? This is much more existential, and it's
It's
about being.
more about being, not
Yes.
doing. We're
Yes.
human beings. But and why I bring it up is not to reflect on the work I'm doing as much as the work you're doing, because I kind of sense that the Anti-Fragile Academy is totally on board with that idea. And I'm just wondering if I could learn from you what I need to know to go deeper from a scientific point of view. That's where I'm coming from.
You, I don't know that what I'm going to say now is necessarily going to take us deeper, but I do want to just kind of validate your guess or your hypothesis there, where when I was coming into this question of performance, a lot of my orientation was coming from the well-being boost or the happiness advantage, right? Sonia Lear-Bermirsky's meta-analysis, like happy people are basically better at everything. But Adam and I would talk realistically as practitioners and as researchers, and are like, Yeah, except for when they don't. Like
Yeah.
there are times where the stress and the anger or the frustration or whatever it is actually an enhancement. So like how do we reconcile that? And when we started to talk more and more, kind of said, well, and you can see this in the research and well-being as well, it just kind of gets washed aside. We have to make sure that there is a distinction between well-being and pleasantness. They are not necessarily the same thing, because if you can make that distinction, then there is room for rich well-being, which can lead to joy of performance and the purpose and the motivation. Grit, yes, but what is grit? Grit is passion and perseverance. I'd argue you got to have the passion if you want to persevere. People don't persevere in things they don't like generally, right? So, how do you have that joy, that pleasantness, that positive aspect while still acknowledging there's going to be unpleasantness along the way, but that's part of the package too. We don't have to bifurcate it and say, just feel good all the time, toxic positivity. Yesterday, I was working with Michigan State soccer. We've worked with their women's team for a few years now. I'm a Michigan State grad. Sorry, Jerry, go green.
Hmm.
But and they all want to visualize, right? Oh, we'll work on visualization. Okay, what do you want to visualize? Success. I'm doing everything right when I visualize, right? I have the perfect touch and the perfect pass, and I'm scoring the goal. And what do we say? We say, okay, well, what happens when you don't do those things? Are you visualizing that scenario too? Are you prepared for that scenario too? And it's just kind of a simple example of saying we don't see those as separate. We see them as complementary forces. And even though it came out of a question of how do we increase well-being or help mental health, it's not at the cost of all these other aspects of life and performance that people have to understand and integrate in order to
Yeah.
really be whole.
Yeah. So one of my favorite questions to ask a team after we've lost the conference championship game on Saturday, one of my favorite questions on Monday, I wait a couple of days, is, so let's discuss why we're a better team because of that loss on Saturday.
Hmm. Hmm.
And immediately it completely changes the whole vibe. It changes the whole emphasis and change. So you're both nodding yes. You want to speak more to that?
I did this with the girls yesterday. We call in pause psych, we call it
No.
benefit finding or silver lining, right? And but
Yeah.
it's such a
Yeah.
it's another good example because it's not an either or. And I'd be curious if you do this with them, Jerry. But does that mean with that team that they have to push away and ignore the suckiness of the loss?
No, 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 no.
Probably
The loss
no.
is the loss is a gem.
Right.
And we have to
It
discover it's a block. And what we have to do is carve away the excess stuff and see the beauty and not beauty is not the word, but why is this a gem? Why is this something so precious that we need to embrace it and then go to the future and I have so many examples of where we've gone to the future, same scenario, conference championship, and it's reversed itself. Why? Because we learned from the gem. The gem gave us the ability to go back and redo the whole situation. So it was
yeah.
just yeah.
So much of this comes down to the idea of moving from, we talk a lot about mindsets and the research around mindsets, but moving things from a threat to a challenge mindset.
Mm.
It's such a powerful, we all know this, we're in this field, but when you look at the research, it's not just a psychological shift, and that's what's most fascinating. It's a psychophysiological shift. So when you do make that change on the assessment, right, going from threat and understanding what your first initial response is of fear, the secondary assessment actually sets the tone for how your body's going to respond to it. And when you can frame it as a challenge, whatever that may be, whether it's a loss, the missed opportunity, so forth, even a challenge to your identity, you didn't get drafted in the first round, and we could go on and on. What you see is you could still be elevated. You still have the endorphins, you still have the noradrenaline, right? But the cortisol is reduced. So rather than having a constriction of blood vessels, you have a dilation, right? So you actually see psychophysiological changes happen just by framing that situation differently. Once you start explaining that to people, I feel like there's a little difference in terms of being open to this idea. Because some of it, for a lot of my professional athletes in particular, they push back because what got them here was not approaching it this way. And usually it's like, great, what got you here is not going to get you there. You made it now to the show. How are you going to stay in the show? And if every day is a threat to your well-being, you're not going to survive here,
And if you
right?
do, you're going to break down somewhere else in your life, your family, your marriage, your
Inevitably.
off the field is going to fall apart. I mean, I'm sure you've seen because everyone was talking about it. Scotty Scheffler's pre-British Open
Yes.
interview, which was so
Yeah.
amazing, right? And just like
Mm.
this is what Jerry and I had just run this retreat with 30 coaches and talking about this purpose beyond, and just this whole thing of even when you win a major, 2 days later it's gone, right? What's there? So I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead, but
No, I think you're spot on. This idea of non-attachment and loving this process. But we say a lot of these things, they're great bumper stickers, but what does it actually mean? And how are people acting on this day to day so it becomes a routine, it's something authentic, and at the same time, it's not based upon fantasy, it's based upon good science. And by the way, everyone's an N of one. We know this, right? Because the
yeah,
average doesn't exist. We're going to
yeah,
extrapolate the idea, but the idea if it doesn't work, let's try something else that's also evidence-based. And
mhm.
developmentally, you're going to change, the environment's going to change, the context's going to change, and you can adapt with more tools, right? The more tools and toolbox, right? The more suited you are for whatever may come.
Yeah. And I think, the hardest thing that I find trying to get across to parents of athletes who they think are on some sort of elite path, which most of them are not, but is that the differentiator, when I talk to a professional golf coach, he's like, everyone's a great ball striker. Everyone can do that. It's the mentality, it's the ability to, you know, deal with the stress and anxiety and pressure to make that 3 foot putt on the 18th hole. Baseball, it's the same thing, especially in baseball where, you're a multimillionaire if you screw up only 7 out of 10 times, and it's like, so this whole idea of trying to get across to parents that it's really it doesn't matter how fast or strong at that level, everyone's fast and strong and technical and whatever. It's in here that's the differentiator that puts you in the big leagues and keeps you in the big leagues, right?
By the way, John, I always loved your material from one of your first books from 10, 12 years ago. I remember reading it in terms of that work. So I've always loved your stuff and your approach, but I just want to give you a shout out. What you've
Thanks.
been doing, I think, has been cutting edge from day one, and I've always loved it. But yeah, when the idea is when talent meets talent, talent is never enough. And that funnel is just going to get more narrow. And now physical capacity, everybody owns it. You're not special anymore. Like I could bring you to minor league camp, like let's go to spring training. And I say, okay, out of these five pitchers, everyone throws 98.
Yeah.
Who's going to be in the show and who's not?
Yeah.
Can you pick that person?
Hmm.
And so usually it's the guy that probably doesn't have all the physical capacity that the next guy has. He has the mental capacity to deal with failure. That is the dividing factor.
Yeah.
So let me take this in a related direction. So how do we, my question is, how do we become anti-fragile? How,
Hmm.
give us give us the roadmap. How do we become, I want to be anti-fragile. Everyone's raising their hand. Bring me there.
So I think there's two different ways to answer this question. And the most academically fair and robust is we need to know a lot more about psychologically and behaviorally what that looks like on an individual level. We are literally in the process. It's under review. Well, it's under submission right now to publish a scoping review on every piece of anti-fragility research that's been done, right? There are two measures that currently exist, and they're both nice, and neither is enough
Yep.
for the sort of work that I think everyone in this Zoom room and probably listening wants to do around these sorts of things. So one of the projects we have going that we're meeting next week to kind of push it forward further is to create a more robust, usable measure that gets into some of the subcomponents of anti-fragility. That said, the only reason we think we're at a place where we can start to do that is there's enough theoretical work laid along the way and some empirical work that gives us some clues as to what makes sort of an anti-fragile individual or team. So you could give simple examples like a barbell approach that to use Taleb's words, right? So simultaneously trying to reduce risk and amplify the possibility of reward. Well, we would take something like that, say, okay, there's what Taleb is kind of saying on a fundamental level is thinking about things from a both and philosophy. So take the conversation we were just having, right? Growth and fixed mindset, challenge versus threat mindset. Well, a lot of times you go into programs, you watch videos, you see influencers, and what do you hear? Got to have a challenge mindset, got to have a growth mindset, got to have a process mindset. And what we would say is, well, an anti-fragile person is going to be both and. They're going to be flexible. They're going to be integrated. So they're going to understand I want to have a growth mindset around getting from 98 to 99 or whatever it might be, or working on my slider, but they're also going to have a fixed mindset in places where it makes sense and it's strategic as well. I always use it's kind of hyperbolic, but if I wanted to, go across the Atlantic to have a pint with my buddy John, I'm not going to swim there. It doesn't matter what kind of growth mindset I have. I need to have a fixed mindset in that situation, right? So that sort of flexibility, the ability to exist in both spaces, the lack of rigidity, right?
Mm.
Another example, what Taleb would call via negativa, remove the negative. And I want to be very clear here because we've been talking about unpleasant. When I say negative, we don't mean unpleasant necessarily. We mean harmful or not useful. What's the stuff in your life, right? If you're already entering into high pressure, if you're already in a volatile or complex situation, then let's eliminate everything else causing chaos or problems that aren't high utility, that aren't meaningful, that aren't helping you in some way, right? So there's a stripping away process involved as well. Go ahead, Adam, jump in.
I was
Yeah.
just going to add to that. What's good, there's a psychological parallel there as well, right? So what else are you moving? You're subtracting the ego, subtracting perfectionism,
Cognitive
subtracting this
load.
cognitive over control, the idea of the self-sabotaging thoughts and rigid expectations. You could see how this could play out in the environment and within oneself. But at the same time, it's a philosophy and a roadmap that somebody could follow and commit to with a lot of tools that could be built in that already exist. We're not recreating the wheel here. We're trying to adapt the science in a way that people can understand it, but also create a philosophy of performance around it.
Mhm.
Go ahead,
I,
Nick. I
Simple
didn't mean to interrupt.
things. No, it's
Yeah.
okay. That you hit the nail on the head. It requires distress tolerance. It requires a sense of purpose and probably intrinsic motivation, because a lot of times you're doing these things not because of what's going to come on the back end, but because they seem worth doing, right?
Right.
They're a priori. They are autotelic in and of themselves. Psychological flexibility. The conversations we have the most with the people we work with are generally things around cognitive behavioral techniques, acceptance commitment techniques, gratitude, benefit finding, perspective taking, right? To kind of navigate these different scenarios and align them with their values in ways that make sense and create that not just, return to baseline, but that growth and additional insight.
And to me, what that fits under in anti-fragility is the concept of optionality. You need to survive long enough to take advantage of the upside. Well, what gives us that? Psychological flexibility, optionality, you know,
yeah.
identity diversification, which is a major issue I deal with a lot with athletes, right? Your self-worth doesn't collapse because your performance did, right?
Right.
This is under the anti-fragility umbrella of optionality. Skin
And
in the game,
and I
real
it's not
exposure.
it's not a sorry it's
yeah,
not a grit and bear it. Like, we spend a lot of time telling people what anti-fragility is not, you know what I mean? And
mhm.
it's not
Hmm.
toxic agency and toxic positivity and just suck it up. There is a flexibility and a malleability to it. Sorry, John, to step on you there.
No, I mean I think this is all so important, and I think overlying all of this for the coach wanting this quality in their team, the parent wanting this quality in the kids is they need reps. Just like you need
Mm-hmm.
reps in the weight room, you need reps of this. And so as a parent, I can't block all obstacles that create these
Yep.
opportunities for rep. I can't pick up the barbell and do the weights for my kid, right? And this is what we see too often is the, in Canada they would say the snowplow parent or whatever, right? Just, pushing all the obstacles out of the way. Like that's the worst thing we can do for our kids, right? The
Yep.
best thing is is give them these opportunities to become more anti-fragile, to face a challenge, to overcome it, to maybe fail and lose, and then ask that question, why are you better today because of what happened this weekend? And this is the biggest challenge, I think, in this world today, not just athletically, but academically, where everything's on your transcript. If we don't get all A's, if we don't get all this, instead of going, no, this is part of it. And I'll just share like this personal story of like my daughter who's in college, and she was just talking about, in this one chemistry class, this discussion of like people using AI on exams. And so, we all know that, in organic chemistry, everyone gets a 50, but there's a curve because everyone gets a 50, right? But now there's no curve because people are getting it all right. And I just said to her, I was like, I'd rather you get C's and do the work yourself than get A's, because it's in doing the work, it's in getting the reps. That's why you're going to college, right? To learn to write a book, not have AI write it for you. And so I
Yep.
think I just want you both to kind of speak to this idea of how important it is to get reps from the youngest ages, even up to the professional level.
This was a massive topic of conversation on those calls yesterday that I mentioned, because for fall sports, fall collegiate sports, most of them are in preseason now, right? They're just about to actually maybe have their first training with the actual staff. Okay. And so for first years, which this group happened to be, or transfers, many of them had not experienced the many negatives and sort of the reality checks that are going to come with Division I athletics all of a sudden. And so one of the questions you get is, well, how do I prep for that if I can't experience it? To which usually the answer is visualization, right? So number one, if you're a parent, if you're a coach, and you're saying, I can't get my athlete the reps they want to get, we need to get. Well, you can always try to put yourself there mentally. And of course, as we know, like that's going to replicate a lot of the same neurochemistry and emotional responses, just less intensely. But to the larger question, number one, should you be trying to introduce stressors? And then if you should, how? And you've asked sort of these how-to questions. We talk about this a little bit in the paper. So I just want to give you and
Yeah.
coaches and parents three things to think about that I think are helpful. Number one is subjectivity or individual differences. So we have a board member, Dr. Karen Dark. She's a PhD geologist. At the age of 23, she was paralyzed from the chest down. Since then, Karen has sea kayaked from Vancouver to Alaska. She has taken her hand bike up to base camp of the Himalayas. She's a gold and silver medalist in the Paralympics and a host of other things. Karen and her level of stress, right, or baseline adaptation is going to be a little different than the 16-year-old, soccer player that's listening to the call right now, right? So number one, who is my kid and what level of stressors can they actually handle at this moment in time, right? And so that brings you to kind of number two, then what's the dose? What's the dose of that stressor? Right? Oh, I want my son to get better at pressure. So I'm going to throw him into some situation that's way too big of a jump, right? It's going to create, we see this all the time. I like sports talk shows and all this stuff. You see this all the time for NFL quarterbacks. Throw them to the wolves. They get the crap kicked out of them. Jerry, you're in NorCal right now. I'm thinking about the Carr brothers who like led records for sacks and then never came back from it, right? Coming out of Fresno. And because the jump was too big, right? There wasn't enough to support around them. And then the third one is frequency. So it might be the right dose of stressor for the right kid or coach or parent or whatever, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it should last a certain amount of time. And it certainly doesn't mean that it should last forever. And there shouldn't be recovery and oscillation. And of course, that's going to be underpinned, I think, by number four, which is skill sets. If I have the right dose for the right kid at the right frequency, that's all cool. But if they don't have skill sets to navigate it, the subjective experience might feel more overwhelming, right? So those are just 3 or 4 things to kind of play with and think about is, well, how do I want to introduce more stressors or intentionally make things more difficult? If I've got a team, that's hard because they're going to all respond to it a little differently. Got an individual, I've got a little bit more control, dose, frequency, subjectivity, skill sets.
Adam,
There's one
anything
thing
to
I,
add?
yeah, I was going to say, there's one thing I hear. I mean, what do you notice about that looking from the coach's lens? What's important here?
You're asking?
Yeah, like what do you notice, right? These from a coach's perspective, what needs to be taken in consideration?
I think a lot of things, right? This is John's answer, right? That we blame on, you know, mentality, or grit or whatever we want to call it. It's actually a skill set problem. Like
Hmm.
we blame that you don't care or you're not focused on the fact that you just don't have the capability to do it. So you don't know what I'm asking, or you don't have the ability to execute what I'm asking. Usually at the bottom of the list is you just don't care. Right.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
I think that's from my perspective is all these things are really important. But have I given the kid, the athlete, the tools to do
Right.
this? Like the Navy SEALs just realized this, right? That they were losing so many people, not because of physical capabilities, because of mental. Well, why don't we give them those tools to stick out SEAL training? Because we can't lose 90% of them.
Right.
Yeah.
I think you're spot on with all that, and I think even from draw it a little bit more, it comes to two things. It comes to a coach being aware of himself and his own biases,
Yeah.
and then it comes to the coach understanding the soul, Jerry, to speak to your word, of the player in front of them. They're not just a performer. You need to understand your athletes as human beings, understanding their background, their traumas, their experiences, their culture, their socioeconomic state. Like we make so many assumptions with the
Yeah.
person in front of us that the problem's in them, as opposed
Mhm.
to what am I doing as a coach to create the conditions of safety to allow this person to thrive, not just
Yeah.
survive the environment.
Well, like
Yeah.
what I like John's quote uh, that he taught me was we're not coaching a team, we're coaching the person.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
so many people are afraid of that because there's a lot of fear involved. One of my books is called Lead with Love.
Hmm.
And
Mm.
I'm not talking kumbaya again. I'm
Hmm.
talking about connection and how to lead with with being connected and to create a safe environment. But that requires time. That requires like having a meeting one on one with an athlete and do that often.
Hmm.
And they become human beings rather than human de doings. They're not
Yes.
just the halfback. They're not just the forward. This is what they are. This is who they are. And so when we get to know people, they feel connected. They feel loved. They feel accepted. They feel like they belong. Uh, what we notice, and you guys probably can back this up with all your research, is that they go the distance. They go
Hmm. Of
further. They
course.
they achieve higher. And we're looking for all these, I call them psycho mumbo jumbos, and that's my profession, but psycho mumbo jumbos, like we're looking for like these words. And I'm saying, how do we how do we take those words and use them? You know,
Right.
uh, I might be digressing here, but
You're
one
not.
one of the
You're
things
not.
I
I think you're
like
spot on.
uh, uh, about this conversation is that we know a lot, all of us, and the people out there are listening because they don't know it as much as we do, and they want to learn from us. And so the question becomes, uh, like how do you go? You might have the word belief on the wall. You walk into the locker room and it says courage, belief,
Hmm.
and what have you. And my expression is, how do we go from the wall to the ball?
Hmm.
Just another way of saying, how do we operationalize all these concepts, these beautiful concepts about, whatever it happens to be, the qualities, how do I coach? How do I become more self-aware? How do I how do I get more grit? Coach, how can I become more courageous? And it's one thing to have the term down, but it's another thing, isn't it, to be able to
Yes.
operationalize it?
It
Yes.
is, and it's also, I think, one of the major issues is too, is that the coach has to actually model this. You can't
Mhm.
ask it of your athletes if you're not willing to show it yourself, a level of vulnerability to owning your mistakes and just
Great
speaking up
point.
about what you need to learn and being there.
Yeah.
And beyond that, I'll give a little personal share here. My son went to an elite school, one of the best baseball programs, high schools in the country, top 50. The coach in 4 years never had a conversation with my son,
Hmm.
never spoke with him.
Mhm.
Not a word. Now
Yeah.
he's
Mhm.
a D1 recruited athlete. He never
Mhm.
talked to him once.
Yeah.
Why is that acceptable?
Yeah.
Well, he wins. Okay, he would win no matter what. There's a lot of talent there. My next neighbor could coach the team and just let him play. They would win. You have some of the best players in tri-state area.
Hmm.
Why do we accept this as professionals, as parents? Why do we allow people like this still operate in the game?
Hmm.
And not only that, be rewarded for that behavior,
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
right? It's
It,
mind-boggling.
it's it is because this goes back to again know the person in front of you, and a very common theme of this podcast across 400 and something episodes now when you talk to the coaches like Phil Jackson, we've Roy Williams, we just had Mark Gottfried on who coached at NC State and Alabama. I mean, across all these sports, right? And they asked him what's the most important tool. I mean, the guy just Mike Potenza, who's the San Jose Sharks strength and conditioning head of performance. He was on last week, and
Mhm.
he said the most important coaching tool is a couch,
Mhm.
right?
Mm.
Like just to sit there and talk
Yeah.
and have individual meetings and get to know the people in front of you. And so your story, Adam, that's so sad because that's treating this as a transaction that my job is to teach you baseball, not to get to know the person, not to invest in you. And you know what? In some years from now, if your son gets married, I would doubt that coach gets an invite.
Ex-
You know?
I might take a step further. Yes, I agree. But and the irony is we're doing it that largely at the pro level, right?
Yeah,
Working at Gotham, working at the Nationals. Like we do this. We truly show love for our players. We do this all the time.
yeah,
Yet at the lower levels, I don't see it all the time. I think this behavior at my son's high school, unfortunately, is ubiquitous.
yeah,
I see it with college coaches as well. And I get it. There's pressures on them to perform. There's contracts. I get it. But this is a human field. If you don't want to coach the human in front of you, you shouldn't be doing this work.
Yeah.
Be an analytics guy. That's fine, or girl. That's
yeah,
fine. Stay behind the scenes. But if you're player facing, you better engage with the human in front of you,
yeah,
or you're not doing your job.
yeah, yep.
But there's a lot
So,
of fear. See, what I look at that, and I'm totally on board with what you're saying, trust me. But there's a lot of fear out there. I think a lot of
Hmm.
coaches, the younger coaches, they're afraid of losing control.
Hmm.
A coach like Steve Kerr, they feel good about themselves, talk about self-awareness. I mean, he's totally like
Hmm.
knows who he is, confident in what he does, is able to be vulnerable because he knows his stuff. But these younger coaches, they're all about, we got to win. We've got to win. Why? Not because winning is fun. We have to win because then I'll be a better coach or it'll make me a better coach. And I really do believe that these coaches are afraid. They're afraid of losing control, but also they don't know how to do it,
Right. I agree.
right? They
I
they
agree with
don't know
that too.
how. They don't know how to relate. And And so they need to be taught. There needs to be an education process. Well, this is what you do, you take your team aside, you sit down with your team. And John was mentioning, we just did this from my brand as Way of Champions. And we just did this training, specialization, licensing. We legally license these people to go out and teach Way of Champions.
Mhm.
And all these people were really understanding and getting the idea that, this is really about going deeper into the soul, into the heart of your athlete. And when they're feeling this way, and Nick, you talk about visualization. I like that word too, and it does make sense. Uh, I've changed it a bit. I call it feelingization. And feelingization is actually getting people in a state of mind, and this can be done where they're actually able to feel what it's like to be a certain way. And coaches they don't get that. And so they need to be taught. There's an education process, and I think that's why John and I are doing this week after week and having experts like you guys on to reinforce what we already intuitively know is right.
I think what you're saying is what the neuroscience tells us. The affective neuroscience is that emotions drive behavior. And I
Hmm.
think in high performance spaces, it's misunderstood, it's dismissed. We like logic, we like toughness, we like
Yeah.
control.
Yeah.
But this is a core idea that's based in the science.
Yeah, feelings equal function, right? You
Mm.
have your thoughts. You have thoughts equals feelings. Every time you have a thought, you got 60, 70,000 thoughts a day. And every time you have a thought, it creates a feeling. Your behavior is based on those feelings, and that's what you're
Mhm.
saying. And it's so refreshing to hear that the science backs that up. I've believed that for years, but I don't have anyone to tell me that. And John and I use that premise in the work that we're doing, and that's how
I think I
it
think you
works.
guys are doing a great, I mean, great work. We have to teach. This is, and obviously we share parallel. We teach emotional literacy, right?
Mm.
Emotion
Yeah,
is data, right? It's not a
yeah,
threat. It's something we
yeah,
experience. It's tell us a story, and you have
yeah.
to create space for it. And how do you do that? You give the right kind of feedback. You have the right kind of communication. We deal with failure in a certain way. We deal with pressure in a certain way that helps us process all of it.
But you know, it's interesting, Adam, and Nick, may I'll throw this to you from like a coaching perspective, and I coached for 30 years, is
Mhm.
like, in this retreat we just did, we spent the first day and a half on self-awareness, right?
Hmm.
And
There you
people
go.
were like, well,
Perfect.
wait, like, where's the tools?
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
Where's the stuff? And we're like, no, like it starts with you. And I think in coaching, if I look at my own coaching journey, right, the biggest issues in it was I spent the first 10 years looking for the magic practice, which of course doesn't exist, right? But number two, I didn't deal with my own self of the end of my playing at 26 and two bad injuries and maybe not feeling fulfilled and things like that, right? And so I think if for people going into coaching, the first thing we should do, and it's never done, is this deep dive into what's the baggage that you're bringing from being an
Yes.
athlete into coaching, and let's start dealing with that baggage, and then
Mm.
you can coach, and then you can reach people.
Incredibly important work. And I love that you started with awareness, right? You are the tool.
Yeah.
You are, yeah, yeah. You can't teach this unless you're going to be this way. Well, I
Yep.
mean, guys, we're kind of at the end of our time here. Is there
Mm.
anything that you wish we asked that we didn't? Any last little piece that you want to add in? And then please just finish up with how our listeners can best connect with your work.
Yeah, I can't think of anything. I think the questions were great. I don't mind speaking for Adam. I could tell just from body language and the enthusiasm, like your questions were awesome, and we just enjoyed talking shop with you both and the conversation in general. If people want to find out more, they can find us at theantifragileacademy.com. Antifragile is not hyphenated, theantifragileacademy.com. And we're on LinkedIn, Instagram. We give away a lot of our stuff. A big part of our mission is democratizing the science. So a lot of it is available at zero cost. And if you want to find out anything more, we're easy to get a hold of through that website.
Awesome. And I was, on your website, you have these things, right? That when you do this training, you have some statistics, 37% more
From our
freedom
white
from,
paper.
yeah,
Yeah.
your white paper,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Better, 34% better mental preparation, 20% less anxiety, 15% better ability to cope with adversity. So all this stuff is on the website as well, and the white paper
Yeah.
is pretty cool. So, guys, thank you so much for being on the Way of Champions. It was great, great discussion, and good luck with the work you're doing. Because I know I can speak for Jerry in this moment to say it's much needed.
Well, thank you so much for having us on, and ditto right back to you guys and the wonderful
Exactly.
work you have been doing and continue to do. And it was our honor to be able to visit with you and share a little bit. And yeah, we appreciate it.
What a
Thank you,
pleasure.
guys.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
Wow, thank you to Nick and Adam. Jerry, thoughts? What's the first thing that pops into your head
Well,
after that conversation?
the first thing that pops into my head was how professional they are in the work they do, and how the research that they're doing is so important because, like I said, I'm out there, you're out there, and we're doing this work in the trenches, and they're able to verify it through their research. And so it's really nice. They seem to have a nice balance between research and practicality and being a little bit in the trenches as well. And so that idea of uh, of having the science behind it to me is so precious.
Hmm. Hmm. And I just love again how they reaffirmed it all starts with self-awareness. It starts with self-awareness as an athlete. It starts with self-awareness as a coach. It starts with
Yeah.
self-awareness as a parent that
Yeah.
unless you take the deep look at yourself,
Yeah.
you can't properly influence others.
That comes up all the time, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And like you were saying, even in our certification program, we thought so highly of that that we had it right up front the very first day, the entire day, self-awareness. And the whole thing is if you don't know who you are, then how can you love yourself? And if you can't love yourself, how can you love others? And if you don't love others, how are you going to get them to perform?
Yeah.
So it starts someplace and it starts with that self-awareness. You have to know who you are in order to love yourself. And so many coaches out there who are transactional, if you really took it to a deeper level with them, we would find out that, you know what, they really don't have that self-respect. They really don't have that self-awareness. They don't love themselves. And therefore, what they're doing is they don't know how to relate to their athletes. They don't know how to relate to the parents and what have you. So yeah, this to me is a subject matter that requires a book. There's so much to be written about that.
Yeah. And I think just, this idea of just, you know, giving our kids the opportunities for reps and
Yeah,
recognizing
yeah,
that each of them is going to view that rep differently. Some are going to look at it as, challenge, and some are going to look at it as a threat. And that's not because of the rep in front of them, it's because of where they come from and what they do and what are they afraid
right,
of and who are they
right,
afraid to disappoint and all those sort of things and
right.
what's the
There's
environment. And
so
so there's
much underlying stuff there psychologically.
so
Yeah.
much to unpack
And
for
and then
sure.
and then I like the point that they bring out. Nick was bringing this out about, then we have to think about the dose of it and the frequency and
Yeah.
and the skill set.
Yeah.
And so it becomes really, like, so I'm working with Johnny or I'm working with Megan or I'm working with Philip. Everyone's different and everyone has different capacities. Like my son going to college on a scholarship was not the kind of athlete that the coach was trying to coach. He was trying to coach one kind of person, not looking at the individual. My son didn't do well under that coaching situation. So
Yeah.
we have to be able to open up to coaching the person.
And I thought Adam's story of his son, in 4 years never having a
Can you
conversation with
imagine that?
his
It's
coach,
un it's incomprehensible.
and they go, oh, but he wins. But it's like he's maybe a great aggregator of talent, and maybe he's a
Yeah,
great technical teacher, but
yeah, yeah.
he's missing this whole piece. And how much better could that team, those kids, be if they felt a little more connection to their coach, if
Well,
they felt like he was in it for me or she was in it
we
for me, and whatever. So
we know this about the coach, that coach is not an extraordinary coach because all extraordinary coaches coach the person.
yeah.
And we know this. I mean, we're talking like high level coaches that we've worked with, we've talked with, and we know. And so it's important for our listeners to understand that let's start thinking more about how we can develop our personal game, individual, with the athlete and coaching the person rather than the sport itself.
When he said that to me, I have to look up. I got to find out the author of this quote, but the college baseball coach who, won 600 games or whatever, and they asked him why he was so connected to his players, and he said, when I reach the pearly gates, I'm afraid that St. Peter would say to me, I gave you 600 boys to turn into men, and you turned them into baseball players, right? And just that quote
You said
always.
that before, but it has more meaning to me today than it
It,
has
it
in the
does when you
past.
hear
Yeah,
stories like that he
yeah,
turned him into a
yeah.
baseball player, but
You
he
turn
didn't
him
turn
into,
him into
good
a
job,
man.
a baseball player, but he's
Yeah,
supposed to be a
exactly.
man,
Well, awesome.
Yeah.
Everyone, thank you for listening. Thanks to Sprocket Sports. Thanks to our Patreon podcast champions. Thank you
Hmm.
to everyone who has gotten bulk orders of books here. Again, you can just email me, John at changethegameproject.com for bulk orders of books for your team. I mean, we just had another coach who used them for the Australian under 23 rowing team to prepare for the World Championships, and pretty cool. Sent
I
us a
never
picture
ever
of the
thought,
whole
John,
team.
that I'd be reaching through my writing and your writing, an Australian rowing team.
It's amazing, right?
Amazing. I mean, it just keeps adding to the depth of the work that we're doing and the people that we're reaching.
Yeah,
And
so much.
I'm so inspired by
Well,
that.
Jerry, your influence is never neutral, man.
Yeah, I have to keep remembering that. That's a great phrase. I wish I knew it, and now that I do, I'm going to keep at it.
Thanks, everyone. Remember, your influence is never neutral as well. So go out there this week, change the world, use it for good. We'll see you again next week, everyone.